Yo, what's up, Defire? So this is a little look into how I kind of get my mid basses and sub to all fit together in the track and to be kind of nice and loud but not too harsh. So let's start with our mids here. Let's assume that you've done your sound design already, or you've got your either your audio clip here of from a sound design session previously, or you could also assume you've got your serum here and some post processing like OTT and all of that stuff. Let's imagine you've got all of that done already, but your sound isn't quite sitting right and you're having a hard time, getting it to sit in the mix properly and with the sub as well. The sub will cover it after. So the way that I'll kind of go about this is, like I said, once I've done most of the sound design side of things, and the sound is nice and it's been like OTT'd and it's nice and big and kind of fills the frequency spectrum. What I want you all to get in the habit of doing, if you don't already, is using some kind of EQ spectrum analyzer, whether that be span or just the EQ itself. Whenever I open an audio track in Ableton, I have an EQ on it by default, just so I've got some kind of window there, so that when I drop a sound in, I can immediately kind of see how it looks. And so this is what I'm going to get into, how it kind of looks on the spectrum. You want to do this with like every sound that you're putting into your song. You need to kind of have a little look at it. You will get to the point where your ears can almost do this for you, and you'll hear areas that need adjusting and things. But if you're not at that point yet and you have a hard time getting them all to fit in the mix, then using your eyes as well as your ears is a great tool, a great help. So this sound, it's just like a short stab. I think it's actually from Bruise Up, from my EP that I just released. So it's just that I'll just make a load of glitchy stuff in sound design sessions, and then drag them into my project. And kind of, I don't really tend to do sound design in my sessions anymore. I'll generally make a load of really kind of full thick noises in another project, bounce them all out, and then write with those, like cutting them up and things. But yeah, let's get back to the way things look on the EQ. So this sound right here, let's make sure that it's soloed. Okay, cool. You can see immediately that it has this huge peak in the middle, and if you couldn't tell already with your ears, now this is gonna make it very obvious to you. So what we need to do here is bring this down, but we want to bring it down in a way where the sound still sounds natural. You haven't lost a huge amount of the sound. It doesn't sound hollow. You don't want to actually like completely remove this area. It was just a bit too loud here in just this space, and we want to take that down to just balance it out with everything else. So we've got a bit more of a uniform kind of smooth signal. You're never obviously going to get a completely flat line. You wouldn't want that anyway. That would be pretty much white noise. But you want all of your sounds to be kind of balanced, and then they're going to sound pleasant to the human ear. Nothing's going to be, like sticking out unpleasantly anywhere. So it's all about going through all of your sounds and making sure that the kind of EQ response is quite nice and balanced. And then once you do that, you'll actually find as well that, so let's assume now that this sound wasn't as loud as I wanted it to be. It doesn't sound loud because the other areas are quiet, but this part here is going to prevent us from being able to turn this up. So kind of like it's too loud, but the other areas aren't loud enough. Or by doing this kind of, by balancing out the waveform more, you're going to now be able to turn up the whole thing, and nothing's going to be sticking out and getting kind of overly boosted. So like, this is one way of getting your things to be nice and loud, is just making sure there's nothing sticking out anywhere, preventing it from being too loud. Obviously different sounds and different timbres are going to look different here, but generally as a whole you want kind of everything to be balanced in terms of not having anything sticking out painfully anywhere. So you would do that with all of your sounds, and then you kind of get onto layering, like filling the spectrum, filling the space. But I started with this and I just wanted to fill some more space, so I went through my kind of glitchy sounds and ignore the names. Went through my glitchy sounds and just I wanted something that kind of would last a little bit longer, first of all, and also fill this kind of low mid spectrum. And I ended up going with this kind of digitally it was just a piece of like one of my bass bounces, I think. Yeah, right. So I ended up taking that just because it like sounded good. It sounded like it filled the area that I wanted it to fill, basically. And then the two together, when this kind of sound finishes here and starts to roll off, this is still going, and you kind of get this extra, it just really thickens it up a bit more. A little bit of advice about layers as well is generally all of your layers on their own should sound bad, because if you think of it like layers of a cake or ingredients of a cake, you wouldn't eat any of the ingredients on their own, but as a whole they make up the cake, which is nice. So if you have a sound which sounds great, then the chances are it doesn't need layering. There's no point chucking other things against it, trying to come up with some new sound, because then you're just going to end up with a mess. Layering is all about taking bits and pieces from sounds like that fill a certain area of the EQ spectrum that you want to fill. So in this example, like I said, this plucky thing does have a nice bit of lows, but they end quite quickly, and I wanted something else just to fill it out a little bit more, and I feel like that really subtly does it. So looking at the EQ kind of response on this, it's really balanced. No EQ needs to be done there. In this example, it works with the layer that I want. It's filling the area that I want. It's high cut to about I think like 150 or something. Yeah, like 156. I see a lot of the times people will roll off their mids way too high, and you like just end up with a really thin sounding mix. You'll have the sub down here nice and heavy, and you'll have really present like highs, but this area here where you get your body and your kind of like chunkiness from, it just gets taken out when you do this high cut, and then the track just feels really hollow. There's just a big spot missing here, and this is where things really feel thick, and kind of that's where the mids really get their weight from, down here. So I like to really leave as much low mid as possible, but maybe like roll it off at like 150 and let the sub take care of everything beneath 150 with saturation and a couple of like with some extra harmonics to fill this area above 100 hertz. But we'll get into the sub in a second. So I'm starting to blabber, but it's all about, when you're layering, it's not about just throwing things together to try and make something new. You need to have a kind of reason and an idea of the frequency range that you want to fill. So I had these two things, and I felt like it just needed something a bit higher, like it just needed an extra, like a squeak or something. So I actually went and found this. It's just again another little like cut from a sound design session I did. Kind of sounds like a basketball sneaker scraping on the court, which I thought was cool. So here, look, for this, you can see there's a very harsh peak there. So I haven't done this yet, but I'll do it right now. I'd go in, just grab a grab an EQ and see if I can get this peak here to just not be sticking out so much. You know, just bring it back a bit and balance out this overall waveform. And then things are going to sound a lot more pleasant to the ear. Nothing's going to be sticking out and sounding harsh. Another thing to be aware of as well is the gain in the EQ and the level at the side. So you always want to make sure you're gain matching. If you remove a bunch of frequencies, obviously you're going to make the sound quieter, and you can compensate by boosting the gain at the side. I generally just try and make sure that I'm staying around 0 dB and that I'm not going in the red, like that, for example. But if I've taken a bunch of things out and it's all quiet, I'll gain match and try and get it back to 0 in each effect that I add. And then I've got these I like to add these little glitchy things. For these, I like to actually have these quite muddy. So it's like a nice contrast between the clean basses, the clean main basses, and then when the sub cuts out and you just get these parts that have frequencies in that you would generally remove, but they just give a nice contrast and kind of break away from the sub and the mids feel just for a second, and you get this different texture that still has nice lows in it. So yeah, it's all about, like, sound design aside, it's all about going through, making sure nothing has crazy peaks. Everything's kind of serving a purpose. You need to like know why everything's there, if that makes sense. Like, don't just throw things in and hope they work. So I had this very, very basic loop. So I've got these little glitchy parts, again, just cuts from sound design session. And then I ran a couple of like mid sounds through Portal and got this, because I felt like this now has enough kind of mids, enough lows with the sub as well. Let's turn that back off. But it's just very dry and boring. There's nothing. So I added this really this texture, this really high pass texture, and this is again just to serve a purpose. It's just there to really fill in that kind of high end. I've high passed it at like 2K, so it's really just only that very high end. But along with these guys, it really starts to fill everything in. And again, I'll be constantly checking everywhere. Span I like to use. That's my like spectrum of choice. I'll watch here and make sure I'm nice and balanced. There's nothing sticking out anywhere crazy, or there's no dips anywhere. Like, for example, if I had like cut my mids too high, like I see some people do, you see it here, you're missing a lot of stuff here. So, or again, if you did like a I see a lot of people do this cut at 4K. They think that's like because it is the most painful area, but people think you need to absolutely remove it, but you don't. You just need to do a bit of a cut there sometimes. But I see people do that, and then on Span,
make your music stand out, get more views, and way more engagement. Bring your music to life. Get Music Visualizer in every format, even for social media. Get started today. The link is in the description.
That will really show up there. So yeah, it's about going through, checking all of your sounds, making sure that the EQ response is nice and balanced. And then that is going to give you the ability to push them louder. And they're just going to sound louder overall, because more of the content will be louder of the sound, if that makes sense. If you've only got one peak that's loud, but the rest of the sound's quite quiet, it's going to sound quite uncomfortable. But when you balance these peaks, turn them down so that overall you can turn up the whole signal, that's when things start to sound really chunky, really thick, really full, and just really pleasant to the ear, because nothing's kind of like standing out and screeching in your ear. So the whole mids group on its own sounds like this. Let's just, in terms of processing, let's take this EQ off. I just put this on for demonstration. In terms of processing on my whole mids group, I don't really do a lot. I've just got a utility to cut out any sides under 150 hertz. I've got this washout thing. That's just like basically a filter. I use that at the end of my phrases or whatever sometimes, like to go into my builds. And then I've got a Fab Filter Pro L. Okay, I don't know what I've done here, but that is... Oh, I turned this EQ up. So I've got Pro L on here, just to obviously stop me going above 0, and just to make sure that I am at 0, and maybe even just kind of pushing into 0 a little bit. And then again, checking on span, making sure, yeah, I'm nice and level. You'll notice as well that I don't do any EQ on the group. I won't low cut the group, because I want some of my sounds to have some of that kind of low end when the sub isn't there, like these little wubs. So I'll low cut everything individually, and the group itself will contain kind of everything, including some kind of glitches with low ending. That's just for when the sub cuts out. So I think as far as kind of getting your mids to fit together, that pretty much covers it. It's all about EQing, making sure that everything is balanced so that it sounds kind of more natural to the ear together, and you can then push it further. Don't cut too much out of the lows either. You want to cut at like 150, and things will sound nice and chunky and warm down in that kind of area, that low mid area. Then as far as the sub is concerned, less is better in terms of like processing. You really just want, so for me, I just literally have a serum with sine wave. I have like a pitch LFO. This is just to give the sub a bit of an attack. I'm sure you have seen a tutorial on this before, or someone do this technique before. It's just literally that. What I like to do with my sub in serum is just make sure that I'm like coming out of serum as loud as I can without being, you know, clipping in the red. I like to basically do that with all my channels. Just make sure I'm as loud as I can be without clipping, and then use the actual channel volume to get it to the level I want it to be. So sub, sine wave, nice and loud, bit of a pitch attack. And then it's just literally as simple as I chuck a saturator on with like 3 decibels of saturation, or like drive. And then that's really it. Like on the group itself, I've just literally got a utility to cut. That's just there by default on all of my groups. That doesn't need to be there. The sub's mono anyway, but that's just there. This was just to take out some of the harmonics. I could have just saturated less. I mean, that doesn't need to be there. But what I like to do on my sub group as well is, again, people compress the sub as well. You don't need to compress the sub, because the sub isn't a very kind of dynamic instrument. It's just always there at one volume. And if you do have any kind of decay or like LFO volume movement in the sub, compressing that's just gonna ruin it anyway. So don't ever compress the sub. I do a very tiny bit of limiting on the group as a whole, just to make sure that I am, because you can see here I'm just under 0. So I like to just push this gain, make sure I'm just into 0. Tiny bit of limiting happening there. So I know that I'm coming out of my channel at like absolute 0. Volume shaper, that's just for the sidechain obviously, and then I'll have the actual group at -6. That's very important. You need to make sure that your sub is at -6 and that your mids, or the loudest mids in your group, the main mids, are at 0. So if you flipped over to the mixer, it should look like this. It should be, hold on a second, let me just solo that and that. Right, you can see that the sub is at -6 and the mids are at 0, like nice and flat. That means that nothing's coming out of these groups. There's no peaks above these amounts coming out of these groups that are going to hit the master and cause other things to duck. We've got a really nice, strong, loud 0 decibel signal coming out of our groups. And sub at -6. And that really is it for me. Aside from like obviously the songwriting part and the sound design part, in terms of getting them to fit, that's really it. It's just about EQing, making them all balanced, making everything fit together, and then you want to basically in span have a nice, well, that was quite a bad shot there. Let's just say like this. You want a nice balanced signal. Sub is about the same volume as the kind of mids and highs, and then a nice kind of dip here where all the muddy stuff would be. You want to be constantly checking your spectrum, whichever one you choose to use, whether it be the EQ window, the spectrum, or span. You just want to be constantly checking and making sure there's no crazy peaks or dips anywhere that don't need to be there. And then like everything else just kind of fits around that, like, because really the mids are the loudest part in the track. The drums are also going to be at 0, but they only happen for a short amount of time. They're quick, but the mids are, you know, they're loud for a long period of time. So it really is a matter of getting the mids to just be kind of natural sounding, have a nice smooth kind of response on the EQ, nothing crazy sticking out anywhere. Sub at -6, no crazy compression or any crazy processing. The sub really wants to be nice and clean. It's just really one oscillator with a few extra harmonics. It really shouldn't be a big deal, a lot of processing. And then yeah, I think things should sit together a lot well. So I guess I'm going to wrap it up there because I think I've covered everything that I wanted to say. I guess, yeah, once you've got everything balanced like that, you'll find you can turn things up a lot more and it will sound so full and loud, and